Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The North American Indigenous Caucus met on March 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, 2014 at the Sycuan Resort in the traditional territory of the Kumeyaay Nation. The meeting was sponsored by the Sycuan Band of the Kumeyaay, the Haudenosaunee, the Vihias Band of the Kumeyaay Nation, and the Lummi Nation. Approximately 97 participants took part in the meeting. At the meeting, the caucus decided to advance the work of the North American Indigenous Peoples Caucus by exploring the possibilities of where this high-level meeting of the UN General Assembly will lead us. We decided to participate by attending the Indigenous Peoples Preparatory meeting here in Alta, Norway, based on the following conditions. 1, to advance the rights of Indigenous peoples as peoples and nations with rights equal to all other peoples. That we have and confirm the inalienable right to and of self-determination as recognized in various international instruments, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 1 of the Human Rights Covenants, and the UN Resolution 1514, including Article 3 of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, as well as our rights to lands, territories, resources, treaties, languages, and culture. Also, at the Global Indigenous Peoples Preparatory meeting, we will advance the position that Indigenous Peoples Outcome Document shall protect and advance the inalienable and fundamental rights we have as Indigenous peoples and nations, including the right to participate fully and equally as peoples and nations to support the implementation of the provisions of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The caucus may propose and consider specific recommendations consistent with these decisions. That the Alta Outcome Document will be reviewed by the North American Indigenous Peoples Caucus to explore and assess the possible benefits and negative impacts and to determine whether to continue involvement in the high-level plenary of the United Nations called the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples. With these conditions, we propose a number of themes for consideration, and we have a long list of themes that we had to consider. We wanted, for instance, international oversight and monitoring mechanisms to ensure implementation of the rights of Indigenous peoples, the issue of the domination and decolonization and self-determination, culture, language, and spirituality, the international personality of Indigenous peoples, free, prior, and informed consent, defense against ecocide, ethnocide, and genocide, the militarization of our lands, international borders which interfere with our rights, environment including water rights, land rights, treaty and treaty rights, defense of Indigenous peoples' traditional knowledge and cultural expressions and genetic resources. Some of the major issues that concern us is the militarization of borders and occupation by military forces, violence against women, children, and elders, the true cost economy, poverty and economic development, forced assimilation, recognizing Indigenous peoples' contributions to the world society, land rights and territorial jurisdiction, treaties, agreements, and other constructive arrangements. With these in mind, the North American Indigenous people recommend to this meeting and to the entire UN system, especially the Permanent Forum, to use the term peoples at all times when referring to Indigenous peoples. The caucus recommends that a systematic analysis of the causation of colonization, domination, and subordination of Indigenous peoples be undertaken, that continued work be done on issues related to the use and impact of the racist doctrine of discovery that has allowed states to steal Indigenous lands and resources, and that a statement be drafted on the doctrine of discovery, and that the doctrine be repudiated at the high-level meeting of the General Assembly. The caucus recommends the organization of an official UN World Conference on Indigenous Peoples in accordance with the promises made by the UN during the second decade of Indigenous Peoples. The caucus recommends that there be an international mechanism and oversight monitoring body for redress and restitution of treaty violations by states and/or successor states. The caucus recommends that the outcome document stress the importance of acknowledging the status of Indigenous peoples in the North, particularly regarding United Nations funding mechanisms. The caucus recommends that the outcome document acknowledge water as a critical element for cultural, physical, and spiritual survival. The caucus recommends that the outcome document take a position against aquacide, the killing of the waters by dams, diversions, privatization, deprivations, extractive industry and mega agricultural developments, hydraulic fracturing, toxins and pollution, and other ways that inhibit or preclude water's ability to nurture and support life. This includes working to immediately halt aquacide by all forms of exploitation, commodification, and other assaults that impede or destroy the life-giving quality of water. The caucus recommends the creation of a body with a mandate to promote and monitor the implementation of the rights of Indigenous peoples, including the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The General Assembly should, in conjunction with Indigenous peoples, establish a mechanism by a process which includes the full and equal participation of Indigenous peoples. The caucus recommends further work be done related to combating violence against Indigenous women and girls, including explicitly linking the issue of environmental violence, including the connection between sexual violence against women and girls and extractive industries. The caucus recommends that the situation of non-recognized Indigenous nations be included in the discussion of violence against women and girls, and that the state's refusal to acknowledge these nations as a form of violence against Indigenous women and girls. The caucus recommends that there be a move toward a world expert meeting to focus on the theme of domination, decolonization, and self-determination. The caucus recommends that the outcome document address the issue of poverty as it relates to the Millennium Development Goals. The caucus recommends that the outcome document reinforce the right of free, prior, and informed consent on all matters that affect Indigenous peoples. And finally, Mr. Chairman, the North American Indigenous Peoples Caucus maintains that a position of assigning a lesser or a subsidiary role for Indigenous peoples as compared to states in any phase of this high-level plenary meeting would constitute a violation of the very rights that it purports to affirm. Real participation is not the same as mere presence in the room. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Kenneth, and very